Happy November, and welcome to another edition of This Guy, the video series where we pick one guy who's making America worse and discuss why they suck. I'm Erin Ryan, host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast.
And I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco, the other host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast. And we have finally arrived at what we hope is the conclusion of our epic trilogy on Donald Trump, the fucking guy to end all fucking guys.
When we last left off, Donald Trump had established himself as perhaps the luckiest man who's ever lived. He'd failed upward to the presidency, a feat that until that point only George W. Bush and maybe Warren G. Harding had come close to achieving.
Trump attracts failure like Leonardo DiCaprio attracts 22-year-old yacht girls. But like the yacht girls, when they turn 25, they've all just seemed to conveniently go away.
Trump was born to a rich man who gave him hundreds of millions of dollars to whittle away on stupid bets and failed investments. He was handed a successful reality TV career and then stumbled into politics at exactly the right moment that the billionaire class realized that the only way they'd achieve their economic policy aims is if they were somehow able to rally the hundredaire class behind a uniquely American form of civic nihilism.
During the 2020 campaign, Trump couldn't run on draining the swamp anymore because the second he landed in D.C., he became a worse version of the corruption that he alleged was already happening before he'd arrived. He couldn't run as the candidate of change because he'd already had a chance to change things.
Well, to be fair, he did change some things in the same way that a chimp on amphetamines behind the wheel of a semi-truck would change the traffic situation during rush hour.
That would indeed change traffic. Heading into Election Day 2020, a couple of things were publicly known. First, Vice President Joe Biden was on course to win the popular vote. We also knew that because of how the COVID pandemic complicated in-person voting, many more people than ever before had cast their votes by mail, which meant that cable news was likely going to be deprived of their bread and butter election night winner call.
And we knew that Trump was planning on claiming victory no matter what happened. We knew this because he said it like a bunch of times. So before we get to the whole Trump tried to cheat at democracy thing, let's start a bit smaller because ultimately Trump isn't a guy with a particular track record of creativity or innovation or, frankly, imagination.
He does one thing over and over again in every aspect of his life, and that thing is cheat.
One of the least surprising things I've learned about any human ever was when I first learned that Donald Trump cheats at golf. In fact, there's a book about it called Commander in Cheat: How Golf Explains Trump by sports writer Rick Riley. Riley wrote, quote, "At Winged Foot, where Trump is a member, the caddies got so used to seeing him kick his ball back onto the fairway, they came up with a nickname for him, Pele. In 2019, when golfers showed up to Trump International West Palm Beach, there was already somebody at the top of the leaderboard, despite the fact that nobody had played any rounds of golf yet."
Let me guess. Donald Trump prematurely declared victory at his own golf tournament.
He sure did.
Hey, guys, speaking of golf.
Oh, okay. It's Crooked staff writer Julia Claire. Julia, where did you even come from?
What are you talking about? I've literally been here the whole time.
Julia is Crooked Media's resident Trump trivia knower.
Now I know I don't get invited to parties.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Well, you bringing up Trump and golf made me remember when a reporter asked Trump if he exercised, and he said that he believes that the human body is like a battery that can slowly run out. So if you work out too much, you might die. And then he said that his favorite exercise is golf, even though he doesn't really walk much when he is golfing.
The number of golf carts into which Donald Trump has embedded an ass groove is large.
Let's pick up where we left off. In hell. The year was 2020. Donald Trump was botching the coronavirus pandemic response, spreading misinformation, holding unmasked events, and downplaying the virus's severity. Over 350,000 Americans died that year from COVID.
It was a perfect backdrop to campaign on one's fitness to lead the country for a second term. Although, weirdly, Trump had been officially spending campaign money on the 2020 race just 16 days after he won the 2016 election and filed his re-election campaign with the FEC at the end of his inauguration.
Now, most presidents filed their re-election bid in the third year of their term, but Trump's decision allowed him to not only start fundraising right away, but potentially ward off any would-be primary challengers. And although the GOP has a deep bench of crazies, none dared to challenge Trump that year. I mean, a few of them technically did, but Trump had such a lock on the party that most of them quickly dropped out.
In addition to COVID-19, summer of 2020 in the U.S. was marked by mass protests across the country over the murder of George Floyd by a white white police officer. Trump used law and order as his major campaign message and posited left-wing anti-fascists as one of the most dangerous groups in America.
He, of course, made no mention of the fact that 3 separate Department of Homeland Security reports ranked white supremacists as the highest domestic terrorism risk in the country. Not only that, a whistleblower complaint asserted that Trump's Department of Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf instructed subordinates to modify intelligence assessments to match the president's rhetoric on Antifa and minimize the threat posed by white supremacists.
That checks out. He had to try anything. His approval ratings were so deep in the toilet that just a few years into his term, he was shown to be one of the least popular presidents in the history of American public opinion polling. The man simply loves winning.
Speaking of deep in the toilet,
where could this possibly be going, Julia?
Remember when, during a small business roundtable in 2019, President Trump complained that people now need to flush toilets, quote, 10 to 15 times in order to get the job done?
We're looking very strongly at sinks and showers and other elements of bathrooms. People are flushing toilets 10 times, 15 times.
I do remember that. Oh.
I wonder what was going on there, digestively.
So here we are, election night 2020. Returns were still coming in early on November 4th, and there was yet no clear winner. But that didn't stop Trump from declaring that he, in fact, had won the election.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
We all know what happened next. Trump's campaign unsuccessfully sued to try to get Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia to stop counting ballots because he was up in all 3 states with only a fraction of the votes counted. A classic stop counting the ballots before I lose scheme. That Thursday night, he held a press conference to again insist that he had won.
By the morning of Friday, November 6th, a group of Trump's senior campaign officials huddled with attorneys to discuss the then president's options as Joe Biden closed in on the crucial majority of 270 electoral votes.
But according to reports, by that time, many of his campaign aides had privately acknowledged that the jig was up. One Trump campaign advisor knowingly told Politico that day, he's going to say they stole it from me, and then he's going to go to Florida and continue to be the most influential Republican in the country.
God, it's so stupid that he was right.
Yeah, because this is America, and stupid is what we do, Alyssa. Over the coming months, Trump would publicly contest Joe Biden's victory based on absolutely zero credible evidence and employed a network of sycophants to repeat that lie over and over until we had election deniers coming out of our eyeballs. That kind of unrelenting propaganda strategy is what's known as fire hose of falsehood.
Okay, very Soviet dictator chic.
Remember when 4 days after the election, the day that the race was called for Joe Biden, the Trump campaign set up a press conference to discuss the campaign's legal challenges of the election results, clearly thinking they had booked the Four Seasons Philadelphia, but actually ended up in front of the Four Seasons Total Landscaping in Holmesburg, Pennsylvania? Which was just a random garage next to a sex shop and across the street from the Delaware Valley Crematorium.
Yeah, that one is hard to forget.
Truly a classic of the genre.
Using all the people and legal tools at his disposal, Trump constructed an alternate reality in which he was the rightful winner of the 2020 election. And when he ran out of legal tools, he went to illegal ones. Trump threatened Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, with legal action if he didn't, quote, find 11,780 votes in order to overturn the state's election results.
When that didn't work, he just kept the lie train a-chuggin'.
According to an analysis by the Washington Post, Trump made more than 800 fallacious claims about the election from Election Day to the end of his presidency. 800 in less than 3 months. That's a level and volume of lies I usually only reserve for my doctor at my annual physical. Despite the fact that all of these claims were proven bunk in federal courts by a bipartisan congressional committee and even a conservative majority Supreme Court, the big lie didn't end when Joe Biden became president. Hundreds of election deniers ran for office in 2022 across the country. Key states enacted more restrictive voting laws to combat fraud that objectively did not happen.
But the most grisly consequence of the big lie came on January 6, 2021. We'll get to that in a minute.
Trump saved a number of the most galling acts of his presidency for the end of his term after he had lost to Joe Biden, kind of like a going out of business sale, but for Trump's brain and democracy.
On December 23, 2020, Trump pardoned 4 American men that had been convicted 6 years prior of killing 14 Iraqi civilians and wounding 19 more in 2007.
These 4 men had been given sentences ranging from 12 years to life imprisonment, including on charges of first-degree murder. But that's Donald Trump for you, always helping out the beleaguered little guy. In a truly depraved act of unsparing malice, Trump accelerated federal executions in the final months of his presidency. This broke with over 130 years of tradition, in which executions were postponed during a presidential transition.
This led the BBC to dub Trump America's, quote, most prolific execution president in more than a century.
I keep my most prolific execution president mug right next to my world's best boss mug. While Trump was on a spree of expediting state executions and pardoning murderers, he and his goons were also cooking up strategy to overturn the election results.
Trump had already laid the groundwork with the big lie, convincing hundreds of thousands of his supporters that rightful victory was stolen from him.
And what's a guy to do when the federal court system has already told him he can't overturn a Democratic election just because the result hurt his feelings? Why, he orchestrates an insurrection, of course.
Yes, Trump promoted the day he planned to throw Mike Pence to the dogs in what he hoped would pressure Pence not to certify the electoral count in the Senate. We all remember Trump's famous tweet from December 19th that read, "Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. We'll be wild."
And we all know what happened next.
We need backup.
Trump gave a speech on the Ellipse at around noon where he egged on the crowd and repeated all of his favorite election-related lies. Then he encouraged them to advance to the Capitol.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing. We will never concede. You don't concede when there's theft involved. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections.
A few hours later, when unspeakable damage had already been done, Trump gave a taped address from the Rose Garden intended to restore calm, but he went off script to let all the rioters know he supported them.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
You're very special.
Very special.
It may feel draining to rehash the events of January 6th, but unfortunately we have to because almost 4 years later, Donald Trump is trying to rewrite history by calling January 6th a day of love orchestrated by patriots.
Ah, yes, a day of love in which a bunch of white supremacist and QAnon groups did $3 million in property damage and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence."
So let's go through the consequences of this day of love. 174 police officers were injured. 6 people died that day, including 1 Capitol police officer. Of the approximately 2,000 to 2,500 who stormed the Capitol, more than 1,200 insurrectionists were charged with crimes across all 50 states, with over 700 of them entering guilty pleas and over 465 prison sentences handed out. Day of love!
Twitter booted Trump on January 8th because they believed he had used the platform to incite violence. This fucking guy alumnus, Elon Musk, famously lifted what was supposed to be a permanent ban when he took over Twitter in 2022.
Thanks to Trump's continued use of the fire hose of falsehood, the majority of Republicans still believe the 2020 election was stolen to this day, and we have elected MAGA nutjobs like Marjorie Taylor Greene, casting the incarcerated January 6th insurrections as political prisoners. Trump has such a guerrilla grip on the Republican Party by this point that there was never any question going into the 2024 campaign that he was going to be the nominee.
A lot of suburban white ladies who have handed their Lily Pulitzer down to their daughters before they went off to college probably hoped that former Trump-appointed UN ambassador, who quit in a moralistic huff, Nikki Haley, would stage a miraculous upset, but that did not happen.
Yeah, and Trump didn't even participate in any of the Republican primary debates. He sailed through one of the most boring primary seasons in recent memory.
Keep in mind, he was positive he'd be running against Joe Biden. He'd been practicing for years. He had a mental bindle of little insults at the ready. But then...
with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare,
Thank you, President
What?
Biden.
No.
Oh my God, Julia, I was at home with my week-old infant, and I went over to my television, I turned on the debate, immediately turned it off.
Yep.
I was like that Grandpa Simpson of him coming into Maison Derriere,
Yeah.
then picking his hat back up and immediately leaving. That was me.
Everybody realized at the same time that not only was Joe Biden old, he was old.
After the June 2024 debate, when the president appeared at best gently alive, many Democrats called for Biden to step down from the campaign, and he didn't at first. Alyssa, here's the fatal mistake that I think the Trump campaign made. So I think Donald Trump believes that everybody in the world is exactly like him. He believes everybody is cruel and nasty, debilitatingly vain. You get it. And so given that worldview, I think it never occurred to Trump that Biden was capable of putting country over his own ego.
That would explain why it seemed like he was caught so flat-footed when Biden bowed out and Vice President Kamala Harris took his place at the top of the Democratic ticket.
And it would explain why he picked JD negative Riz Vance to be his running mate, a guy who refers to his own children as his wife's kids, a trad Catholic Silicon Valley simp who cosplays as the very thing he hates the most. For more thoughts on JD Vance, who is actually 3 Peter Thiels in a trench coat, check out our This Fucking Guy episode on him.
One moment that felt like a real sea change was when Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, before he was selected as Kamala Harris's running mate, went on MSNBC and called Vance and Trump weird. It was the perfect insult for those two fucking weirdos, and it is one of those insults that's impossible to come back from without making yourself look worse.
Still, Trump tried the "I'm not weird, they're the weird ones" tactic that has failed so many fifth graders.
They were saying JD and I are weird. No, we're very solid people. She's weird. And that vice president of hers is really weird.
Sure, Jan.
In addition to millions of Americans finally being able to put into words how off-putting the Trump-Vance ticket was, once Harris was in the race, Donald Trump suddenly looked and sounded very old.
And Harris had all the energy, vigor, intelligence, and toughness. Next to her, Trump looks like a guy who would spin around and fall over if he ever tried to throw a punch.
Vice President Harris, seasoned prosecutor that she is, knew exactly what to say to get under his skin. At the only presidential debate this cycle back in September, she wiped the floor with Trump like he was a saggy pink mop. What really got to him didn't seem to be her insistence that Trump is a danger to the country. That doesn't bother him. What does is the implication that his crowd sizes aren't what they seem. This Fucking Guy is brought to you by Lumen. I want to introduce you to an amazing tool that helps increase energy levels and feel better in your body. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it tells you if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on in your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips on how to keep on top of your health game. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, etc. My husband has been using Lumen, and he's been loving it. He says it was super easy to set up his health goals in the app, and it's helped him determine what his body needs to get closer to reaching his goals. I am excited to try it when I'm done breastfeeding my child. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/guy to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/guy for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Hey guys, remember when right after he was inaugurated, Trump made his little press goblin Sean Spicer insist to the press corps that Trump's inauguration was the largest inauguration in the history of the country? And that when people pointed out that one could conclude by visually inspecting photographs of the inauguration that Obama's inaugurations were way bigger than Trump's, Spicer doubled and tripled down and actually got angry with members of the press who tried to fact check the obvious lie. It would be like if I used photos of Megan Fox on a dating app and then my date was like, "Hey, you're not the person in this photo." And I was like, "Yeah, I am. That's me."
And then after the debate, Trump lumbered into the spin room like Pappy after the sun goes down.
I've worked in and around politics for literal decades, thanks, Erin, of my life. And when your candidate hits the spin room after a debate, that ain't a good sign. Of course, Trump's most devoted butt cuddlers insisted that Trump actually won because they'd claim victory if Trump had taken the stage and pooped his pants before running off crying.
The post-debate spin from the Trump camp reminded me a little of the battle between King Arthur and the Black Knight. That was a draw in Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Did not expect you to drop a Monty Python reference in the Donald Trump video.
It's called The Weave. It's called The Weave, okay? And speaking of the weave, Donald Trump appears to have noticed that other people have noticed that his manner of speaking has become concerningly addled in recent months, and that his speeches have gotten longer and more nonsensical.
She destroyed the city of San Francisco. And I own a big building there. I shouldn't talk about this, but that's okay. I don't give a damn because this is what I'm doing. Sell and get the hell out of there, right? But I can't do that. I don't care, I lost billions of dollars. Somebody said, what do you think he lost? I said, probably 2-3 billion. That's okay. I don't care. They said, do you think you'd do it again? And that's the least of it. Nobody. They always say that, I don't know if you know, Lincoln was horribly treated. Jefferson was pretty horribly. Andrew Jackson, they say, was the worst of all. And I said, do that study again, because I think there's nobody close to Trump. I even got shot.
It's like he threw a bunch of subjects and predicates into a blender and just hit puree. So he's made up something called The Weave and declared that it is a genius way to tell stories.
Erin, if I ever show signs of having the weave, please make sure I get medical attention from a specialist in cognitive decline.
Of course, having the weave is one of the first signs of experiencing a stroke.
Hey guys, I heard you mention the weave.
Well, you are sitting like swinging distance from me.
Remember when Trump went off on that rant about sharks and batteries and electricity? I'm paraphrasing. But during one speech early this summer, he told supporters a story where he had one of his famous imaginary conversations with a man who told him that he was very smart for wondering whether or not electric boats could create a deadly electric current in the water with their batteries and create a sort of saw-like choice for boat captains between being electrocuted or being eaten by sharks if the boat sank.
If the boat is sinking, water goes over the battery, the boat is sinking. Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted? Or do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted? Because I will tell you, he didn't know the answer. He said, nobody's ever asked me that question. I said, I think it's a good question. I think there's a lot of electric current coming through that water. But you know what I'd do if there was a shark or you get electrocuted? I'll take electrocution every single time.
Okay, my favorite part of this clip are the two identical Santa Claus-esque guys standing behind him. You can see them nodding along like, okay, I follow what he's saying.
Yeah.
And then I see them lose the conversation. And finally, when Trump is like, you want to get electrocuted, they're like, oh, yeah, I get it.
And that's actually a beautiful metaphor for this country. Remember when he told a room full of women that he was the father of IVF, but also that Senator Katie Britt had only recently told him what IVF is? And remember when he promised that the government would pay for IVF, and then neither he nor his running mate JD Vance mentioned that promise ever again? And remember when he said he'd move to Venezuela if he lost the election?
Julia.
No, I've got more.
Okay.
And remember when he insisted that the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is given to civilians, is better than the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is given to service members who were wounded or killed in battle?
It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets, or they're dead. She gets it, and she's a healthy, beautiful woman.
Oh, God.
And remember when he was in Arizona and said this word that we're still trying to figure out?
Also, we have many Azerasians in our room.
And remember when he told attendees at an event fighting anti-Semitism that if he lost, it would be the Jews' fault?
I wasn't treated properly by the voters who happen to be Jewish. If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens, because at 40%, that means 60% of the people are voting for the enemy.
Yes, I remember that.
Wow, Julia, you contain multitudes. Thank you. One thing that is important to point out is that as Trump deploys his fire hose of falsehood, What's missing from his demented news from Lake Wobegon style screeds is any substantive policy. Where you'll find policy details is in a little 900-page document known as Project 2025. Project 2025 is a production of the Heritage Foundation, the same conservative think tank that told Donald Trump what Supreme Court justices to pick during his first term. It was co-authored by people very close to the Trump campaign. JD Vance wrote the foreword to the book written by one of the policy proposal's main authors.
Hey, remember when Trump got to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, and as a result, the Supreme Court ruled that women's bodies should be up to individual states to legislate, and how one of Trump's favorite campaign trail lies is that everybody wanted their podunk state legislators to be the ones to vote on reproductive freedom, even though basically all available polling from the last half century contradicts that?
Republicans in the post-Roe world are really the dog that caught the car. Among other things, Project 2025 calls for eliminating abortion, seriously restricting birth control, tracking pregnancies, and other federally sponsored creepiness when it comes to women. It proposes basically turning the president into a dictator and nonpartisan civil servants to be political appointees that can be hired and fired at the whim of the commander-in-chief. It aims to turn the U.S. into a Christo-fascist theocracy. It would eliminate things like regulations around food inspection and the environment. It would be a complete disaster for climate, like a pile driver against the natural ecosystems of the earth.
Some real Gilead meets Mad Max shit.
One thing that's starting to become clear as Trump's brain unspools like a film reel from an open camera is that if he's elected, Trump will not have the mental capacity to make the decisions necessary for a president to make. He's old as fuck. He's easily manipulated. He has, in the wings, JD Vance, who has only been a senator for under 2 years and could wind up being president if Trump's decline continues. One good sign is that heading into the final days before the election, Trump and Vance are deep underwater with women, even women who normally would vote Republican. Old women, white women. He's even losing the Karen vote. This despite the duo's best attempts to court women with such tried and true tactics as appearing on stage with women and saying normal, woman-friendly things like, "We love fertilization."
But things are still so closer than they should be.
Even if you're not jumping for joy over all of Kamala Harris's policy proposals, at least vote to send Trump to jail. Be a petty bitch like me. Because remember earlier when I noted that consequences slid off Trump like dollar store hair dye running down the forehead of Rudy Giuliani? Well, one can only fuck around so much before the find out police come a-callin'.
We may finally be arriving at some real legal consequences for Trump himself. In 2019, Trump became only the 3rd president in U.S. history to be impeached. Can't believe we skipped that whole thing in the last episode.
In fairness, Alyssa, that episode is like an hour long, and we ran out of time.
Trump's 2019 impeachment was over his attempt to seek foreign interference in the U.S. election on his own behalf and on his attempt to block investigations looking into his conduct. Trump was caught pretty dead to rights trying to get Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to announce an investigation into Joe Biden in exchange for increased military aid to Ukraine. There were also murmurings that Trump wanted Ukraine to take the blame for election interference in 2016 that had actually been perpetrated by the Russians.
Trump was also caught dead to rights trying to fuck with the investigation. He encouraged witnesses to ignore subpoenas, refuse to cooperate, etc.
Democrats didn't have the numbers to get him out of there. Republican senators didn't even pretend to care about whether or not Trump had actually done the high crimes and misdemeanors he was accused of. In February 2020, the Senate voted to acquit him, which of course was always going to happen. That cake was baked before it was even put in the oven.
And not to minimize the second impeachment by glossing over things, but it was pretty clear that what happened on January 6th was an impeachable offense.
And since Mike Pence was only willing to halfway stand up to Donald Trump and refused to invoke the 25th Amendment after he literally incited an insurrection and endangered the lives of thousands of people, including chiefly Mike Pence's life, Congress didn't really have a choice in the matter.
Nah, you can't let that one slide.
But even though hundreds of rioters were arrested and sentenced to serious jail terms, Trump was acquitted again. It reminded me of when he famously said during the 2016 campaign that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people would still vote for him. In this case, he'd become like a tumor in the brain of the Republican Party, so deeply entrenched that any attempt to remove him would kill the entire host. When it came to January 6th, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, to borrow a Michael Jordanism, took it personally and went turbo in her anti-Trump crusade. And even though the second impeachment didn't result in a conviction, 7 Republican senators voted to convict Trump. Now, I know a lot of Trump dislikers, or hell, justice appreciators, have been waiting decades for that last 10 minutes of a Martin Scorsese film when the entertaining crook protagonist is sitting in their office or at a cocktail bar or whatever, and the FBI barges in over a fun little track and hauls them away. And the closest we've gotten to that point so far was probably August 8th, 2022, when the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago.
Wait, Alyssa, when you picture the Mar-a-Lago raid scene like it's a movie, what song is playing over it?
Erin, like all good mob movies, it's Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones.
Fair.
The raid happened after a referral from the National Archives, who had requested that Trump return some sensitive documents that he had in his possession after he left the White House. Trump didn't, and the librarians got the FBI involved. This is why I never fuck with librarians.
Especially if you have 13,000 overdue library books, which is the number of government documents that the feds ultimately recovered from Trump's property. Some of it was stored in bathrooms, areas that were accessible to staff and the public. Of the documents, 337 were classified, and some contained information on such trifling matters as our nuclear program and national security.
Funny enough, the reason that what Trump did is a felony under federal law is that Trump himself signed the FISA Amendments Reauthorization Act in 2017. That law also increased the maximum penalty for that crime from 1 to 5 years.
Lock him up. Lock him up.
But alas, the gears of justice were gummed up by one Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee and overall simp for fascism, who's tried to dismiss the charges resulting from the raid. That case has been appealed and will likely result in Judge Cannon getting a judicial tongue lashing from the 11th Circuit, which is already kind of annoyed with her. But as it stands now, Trump probably won't see a courtroom regarding this set of felony charges until after the election. If he wins, he'll just pardon himself.
But justice is like a stiff breeze at a kilt convention. Eventually, what was hidden will be exposed, no matter how hairy. There was a little civil case that could, I think, canning its way through the courts in New York. Writer E. Jean Carroll, who had accused Trump of raping her in a Manhattan dressing room in the 1990s, was suing him for defamation because he called her a liar back in 2019.
During that drawn-out legal battle, Trump tried to claim that the federal government's lawyers should be defending him during the suit since it was filed when he was the president, among other ridiculous spaghetti-at-the-wall legal tactics.
Eventually, a jury in Manhattan found that Trump had raped her and was thus committing defamation by calling Carroll a liar. Jurors awarded her $88.3 million. During the trial, Judge Lewis Kaplan allowed the infamous Access Hollywood grab him by the pussy tape to be admitted as evidence.
There was more legal trouble brewing for Trump.
Stormy weather.
Correct. This particular disgusting story begins in July 2006. I'd like to remind audiences that Donald Trump's youngest child was born in May 2006, so his wife Melania was likely still physically healing from birth when this happened.
Youngest child that we know of. But I digress. Trump is away at some stupid golf thing, and he runs into an adult film star named Stormy Daniels. He invites her to his room. The two have sex.
Gross.
I know. 10 years later, in 2016, he's running for president, and in the waning weeks of the campaign, tries to have his lawyer, Michael Cohen, pay her to keep quiet. He paid her $130,000, and that payment is structured in such a way as, not to get too into the weeds, it's illegal.
And Manhattan DA Cy Vance charges Trump with 34 felony counts over falsifying business records and general big-time rule breaking. And Trump is found guilty of all 34 counts. Sentencing on that has been delayed until after the election.
What's interesting about that is that these charges are state-level crimes, which means that the only person who could pardon Trump would be the governor of New York. Even if Trump wins the presidency, he can't pardon himself.
Although if New York ever elects some kind of MAGA chud as governor, you know that's the first thing on their agenda. This is why we all need to pay attention to who is running for statewide office.
So we saved the most serious case for last, the one related to Trump doing some treason-adjacent stuff. In D.C., Special Counsel Jack Smith charged Donald Trump with even more crimes over inciting an insurrection. That trial was derailed temporarily when the Supreme Court ruled that the president has wide-ranging immunity for official acts, which is cool because until that ruling, I didn't realize that the U.S. presidency was kind of a make-a-wish program for criminals, and that when we're voting for president, we're also picking one American who got to do crimes for free.
After that ruling, Smith, in a classic Gemini move, went back and totally rewrote the indictment to make it clear when Donald Donald Trump was trying to threaten and goad Mike Pence into disenfranchising millions of voters by refusing to certify the election results, he wasn't doing it as part of his official duties as president, because running for re-election is not an official duty of the president. Duh.
As recently as October 2024, even more details of that legal case are coming to light, some of which weren't included in Congress's January 6th report, because I guess people are less likely to ignore a subpoena if it comes from a grand jury than they are if it comes from Congress.
One fun detail, though, Trump was alone in his office watching TV and scrolling through Twitter when the insurrectionists breached the U.S. Capitol.
So he knew what was going on, but he didn't stop it. And he'd caused it.
Overall, Donald Trump has been charged with 91 total felonies and been convicted of 34 of those. So for Trump, everything hinges on him winning this election. If he loses, he could go to jail.
And if he doesn't go to jail, which he very well might not, he is rich and white and very old, he stands to lose something perhaps even more important than his freedom: his reputation, his prestige. The truth about what a weak, lying little worm he is has been laid bare by his insatiable need for fame and the scrutiny that comes with it. If he wins again, he'll undo all of the hard-won gains of the Inflation Reduction Act. He'll once again likely put his fossil fuel buddies back in the top fossil fuel regulatory jobs, like all of the oil and coal lobbyists who are crawling around Trump's EPA.
Project 2025, written almost entirely by former Trump staffers, promises to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, dissolve the EPA, and block environmental justice measures that would attempt to address the disproportionate harm environmental pollution has had on marginalized communities.
The planet is too big to kick that one back onto the fairway. So, Alyssa, on a scale of 1 to 5 weasels, how do you rank a post-election day 2020 Donald Trump?
Erin, I have been saving my 5 weasels for today. 100% without question. 5 weasels. He's a threat to the environment. He's a threat to humanity. He is a threat to all that we care about.
Oof. I feel like he was a 5 weasels when he held the presidency. And it has waned to a solid 4 weasels because he isn't in charge right now. So he can't really order the government around. He's not the commander-in-chief of the military, but that doesn't mean he's not dangerous. So I give him a 4.
Whew, Erin, that was an epic This Fucking Guy. A reminder to all of you out there, if you haven't voted yet, you gotta.
Talk to your friends, neighbors, and random people in the women's restroom, or the men's restroom, or any restroom.
And if you want to get involved in these last crucial days before we learn if America has been renewed for another season, check out votesaveamerica.com/2024.
Thanks again for watching. If you like what you've seen, please like and subscribe. And if you've got nominees for a future episode of This Fucking Guy, please leave your ideas in the comments.
And go vote on or before November 5th. We'll see you on the other side.